Yeah, in the mid '90s, when we first began reuniting this brotherhood you're talking about, John Sergeant Cologne did find Don Marshall's family. They lived in Hawaii, and he went to the gravesite and let me tell this story.
Sure.
Then we'll get back to the other one. But this was in the mid '90s that Sergeant Cologne found the gravesite of Don Marshall, and it took a lot of effort, and several people were searching. We had no idea where he lived or anything. We had a clue, but long story short, his grave was found, and we got to thinking, well, what about the other 7 guys? And then what about the other people who were killed in our company? And over the several years after that, it began to grow. Our battalion, the 3rd Battalion, 506 Airborne Infantry, served 4.5 years in Vietnam. I was there for the first year. And in that 4.5 years, 161 Koreans, the 506, we were Koreans, were killed. Memorial Day of this last year, we sent 161 flowers to 161 graves. And going back to when John found Don Marshall, that first grave, then we started looking for more and more and more. And every time we'd find a grave, we would send flowers every Memorial Day to that gravesite. And it reached a point that we got, actually we're missing one grave, but the numbers match, but there's still one grave missing that we can't find. And it costs us about $10,000 a year to do that. And that's that brotherhood thing that you're talking about. So anyway, that came out of Don Marshall and John Sergeant Cologne.
So
But
Sergeant Cologne, he lived then.
Yes, interesting story. And I could get off on a lot of stories here, but yes, John. Well, let me start the story from the beginning. There were some other people killed that day in the battalion, and when I finally arrived at the aid station that night, in the back of the aid station was the morgue, and there had been some previous killed in action before that. The bodies were still. There were more than 8 bodies in the morgue when I got to the aid station, and John Cologne's body was in a body bag in that morgue, dead, supposedly dead, and they're kind of stacked in there. It's kind of hard to describe it because it was a temporary aid station, and they were more concerned about the living than they were the dead. So they bring the bodies in the body bag and stack them in. And Lieutenant Washington, who was a medical services officer, his job was to go back to the morgue and to identify the bodies and get everything ready for the paperwork to be sent, to the Department of Army. And I don't know exactly what happened, but something happened. John moved, or some action he did while Lieutenant Washington was getting his identification and all that stuff. And he goes running up to Dr. Lovey, the battalion surgeon. He said, "Doc Lovey, that guy's alive." Lovey says, "No," it's just rigor mortis or whatever, the body reacting. And Washington said, "No, this guy's alive. Come here." So they go back in the morgue. I wasn't a witness to it, but I was in the aid station, I think, when this happened. But so Doc Lovey does a little something. He says, "My goodness, this man, he is alive." So they yank him out the body bag and start getting him triage and all this stuff, and because he had blood all over him. And John didn't know this. So my first reunion with John Cologne was in '97, I believe it was, in Reno, Nevada. A handful of us, brotherhoods, so we were going to get together and meet. So John came to the reunion, and I met his wife, Annie, for the first time. And Annie was pregnant at the time John was killed, had their first child. So Annie's standing here, John's standing here, and I'm standing here, and we're just having a grand old time talking about things. Well, Lieutenant Washington walks in, and I introduced him. I said, "This is John Cologne." And Lieutenant Washington's a black man, and he turned white. He said, "You are John Cologne?" Well, yeah, I'm John Cologne. He said, "I want to shake your hand." I don't believe it. He just went all through this thing, and John is just as puzzled as he could be. What's going on? About that time, Dr. Lovey walks in, and Washington grabs Lovey. "Well, Lovey, here's Sergeant Cologne." And they just making this big event about it. This is Sergeant Cologne. And everybody's puzzled. I didn't know the story. And so it was obvious that none of us knew. So finally Kurt said, "John, you don't know what happened to you, do you?" He said, "No, I remember waking up in the hospital in Japan." And he said, "Let me tell you the story." And I'm standing here watching John, watching his wife, Annie, as Lieutenant Washington says that he took him out of a body bag. And they had one child. Had John died, they'd had one child. Ended up had three.
Okay.
And you could just see the look on her face. Those two children that were born after he came home from Vietnam would never have existed if Lieutenant Washington hadn't taken him out of that body bag. So anyway, John recovers. It takes him about 3 years to recover. He's crippled, handicapped very much, and he moved back to Michigan and got a job at the local Dodge dealership, washing cars or whatever. And then one day the dealer said the dealer sold 6 new cars that year. And he said, "John, I'm going to get out of the business. I'll sell you the business." And John didn't have the money, but he said, "Okay, I'll buy the business." And he drove a record night to help pay for all. Anyway, so soon after John bought the dealership, the Dodge Chrysler came to him and said, "We're going to close your store. You don't sell enough here." He said, "I just bought the place. Give me a year." And they said, "Well, we'll give you 9 months. If you don't sell some cars in 9 months, we're going to close this place down," which he already had purchased. So in 9 months, John sold 101 cars. And they kept it open. He ended up being the 3rd largest Dodge dealership in Michigan, the state of Michigan, automotive world.
After Vietnam, what did you do?
Went back to college and did exceptionally well. I'm quite proud of myself.
What school?
East Tennessee State.
Okay.
I wanted to go back to, my plan was to go back to the University of Tennessee and re-enroll in civil engineering. And I looked at the curriculum, and it's almost as if I had to start over again. Well, I'd gotten married. When I got home from Vietnam, I got married and wanted to, just to do more adult things. And I said, I need to get a job. I can't just keep going to school forever. So I chose then to go back to East Tennessee, where I had more credits built. I could get out in 2 years. And I majored in industrial technology, which was second best to what the civil engineering. So I completed college there. And as soon as I left the active duty, I joined the Tennessee National Guard.
Okay.
Graduated from ETSU in '71. I went to work for 1 year, maybe a year and a half, in Bristol, a place called Univac. And it was Sperry ran, they made big, huge disk drums for computers, which now are something about the size of your fingernail, I guess. So I worked there for a year, and then I went to Nashville. Whoa, what a great place that was. Spent about 5 years in Nashville, 6 years, at Aladdin Industries. We made Aladdin Industries, they were known for their Aladdin lamp and their thermoses, the Stanley bottles. And I didn't do it working in that department, but I worked there and it was a great career. I loved that job. I was supervision, and it was long, hard hours, and I learned a lot, and I liked it. But I wanted to get back to East Tennessee, so I took employment with a company called Royal Brass and Hose in Knoxville, and I worked there for about 20 years,
Okay.
and I did everything that company except own it. And just about, I didn't do a lot of sales, but I did part of that business. The business I did, I mastered it.
Were you living in Knoxville at the time?
Yes, yes. So in 1996, I guess it was, a friend of mine, Wayne East, we decided we would form our own business. So we co-founded a company called Off-Road Equipment Parts. And the joke was that we would go from bank to bank to bank to get a line of credit to open the business. And the joke was that we wore a 3-piece suit with an empty attaché case. And we would go bank to bank. We finally got a bank that's on our signature $1 million. So we took that $1 million and started Off-Road Equipment Parts, and that program, that business was, it's like one man's junk is another man's treasure. It had to do with heavy equipment parts, and our first purchase of parts came from Puerto Rico. There was a cat dealer there who, there was a big storm came through and flooded their warehouse. And so the insurance company paid the dealer for their damages. So then the insurance company owns the damaged goods. So the insurance company doesn't want to own damaged goods, they put it up for sale. And so we bid on it, paid I think about 4 to 5 cents on the dollar. If it sold for $1 for cat, we paid them like 4 cents. And we brought in from Puerto Rico, I don't know, 6 or 8, maybe 10, those big Connexes, big huge containers. And you'd open the door and there's so much that seawater was awful. So about half of it we just threw away. But the water was this high, and they also owned everything above it that never would touch the water. Prime stuff. So we got that stuff in, put it in inventory, and we went about selling it as surplus parts, not as a cat dealer, but as a third party, or what do you call it? There's another word for it. But we sold it independent of cat dealerships, and we did quite well with it. And
where were the headquarters?
In Alcoa.
Okay.
You know where West Chevrolet is?
Yes.
It's just those warehouses are back behind there. I think
Okay.
I retired, sold out my interest.
Okay.
I'm no longer connected with it, but I think there's about 3 of those big warehouses. There's probably 50 employees there now, and it was in Company A.
Sure.
I was assigned to Company A from the very beginning of 3rd 506, the Currahees. And I was with Company A up until the time I was wounded, and in Fort Campbell and at Vietnam. Now, my company commander, the man I worked for, his guy, he's my boss, was a captain. He joined the Army just at the very tail end of World War II. Just enough that he didn't serve in combat, but he got a certificate or a ribbon for World War II. And he was a E3 or something like that, E4, in Korea. He was smart enough, he was in the crypto business. He was a signal, and he did a lot of crypto work for the intelligence. And he was in Korea when the war broke out. He was on a little peninsula, and he had to escape himself. He didn't. But anyway, long story short, he escapes, and then he goes back again in the 187 and fights with the 187. And during the War of Korea, in the 187, he got a direct commission, and he got commissioned, and they said, "Okay, Lieutenant Gaffney, where do you want to work? What unit do you want to serve in?" He said, "Well, I want to serve in the 187." And he said, "No, you can't do that. You're an officer. You got to go somewhere else." Long story short, he said, "Okay, I'm not leaving my guys." He said, "How do I give up my commission?" Well, they said, you resign your commission. It goes into the reserve and stays in the reserve, and you go back to active duty as enlisted," which he did. Well, he worked his way up in the early 60s. He got up to around sergeant major, and he was one of the first people to be in the special forces. He was a sergeant major in special forces, and he'd had numerous tours in Laos and all around Southeast Asia, all kinds of things he'd done in the special forces world. And when President Kennedy was killed, his body was in the rotunda, and the old guard there provides all the ceremonial services for dignitaries. Mrs. Kennedy said that President Kennedy was so fond of the special forces, he wanted some special forces, or she did, honor guards there. He got selected to stand honor guard over President Kennedy's tomb or casket, which is a very interesting story and tells that. But anyway, that just tells you what a caliber this guy is.
Yeah.
So he goes on, and he's got about 20 years service or so, and the Army says, "We've never had a command sergeant major of the Army. We're going to create that job." And we go across the whole Army and say, who all wants to be, who qualifies for this position? He was number 3 on the list to be the command sergeant major of the Army. And he didn't get selected. And the committee told him, after it was over with, they said, we all agreed you were the choice to be the first command sergeant major of the Army, but you only been in 20 years. These other 2 guys have been in 28, 30 years, and you only get 2 or 3 years and you're out. After this job, there's no place to go. So we didn't pick you because we wanted you to stay in the service. So, okay. So then he's going along, and all of a sudden he gets this letter from the U.S. government. "Greetings, Captain Gaffney. You've been called to active duty." Now, here's this guy that's been a sergeant major, done all these things, and he's now a captain instead of a sergeant. The sergeant majors have a lot better life than captains do. So anyway, he becomes my commander, and we called him Terrible Tom. And he was an amazing guy. He was 3 times the man Chick Rowley was.
Where was he from?
He was born in California, but Georgia is where he really calls home. And he currently lives in Aiken, South Carolina. Tom Gaffney. Now, he comes in and takes over the company, and he goes to the first sergeant. First sergeant is E8, Bull Gergen, and after Bull's term with 3506, he's promoted to sergeant major, and after Vietnam, he comes back to Fort Benning as the command sergeant major of the Ranger School. I mean, he is the command sergeant major of the Ranger School. My battalion commander that trained us at Fort Campbell and took us to Vietnam, Lieutenant Colonel Gerasi, World War II veteran, he later got promoted to full colonel. He came back as the colonel of Ranger School. Now, between Colonel Gerasi and Captain Gaffney and Bull Gergen, those were the people that trained me to be a soldier. And one nice story, Captain Gaffney comes into Bull Gergen and says, first sergeant says, "Tell me about my company." Of course, the company was just being filled up. We were filled up and deployed as a fighting unit. So Bull Gergen said to the captain, he says, "Captain, Says we got some of the sharpest enlisted men you've ever seen. They're physically fit. I've screened all of them. They're all mentally strong. They're good with their weapons. You got the best enlisted men ever. He said, okay. He said, how about my NCOs? Bull Gergen said, I handpicked them. Every NCO you got, I picked them out of the Army. They're the best the Army has to offer. He said, well, good. Says First Sergeant, says, how about my second lieutenants, all of which had just graduated from OCS and a jump school. We'd just come out of OCS and jump school. Bull Gergen leans forward to the captain and says, Captain, it ain't worth a shit. That's a quote unquote. So that's my beginning. With these three guys, I wasn't worth a flip. And they made me made us what we were.